Good afternoon. Welcome to the August 15th meeting of the Design Review Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order. The DRC is a subcommittee of historic zoning. The meeting is informal and designed to guide applicants through the process of obtaining a certificate of appropriateness or COA for projects within the city's historic districts in light of the Historic District Design Guidelines. Applicant participation in DRC meetings is voluntary but highly recommended. Changes made or suggestions taken by the applicant based on the discussions with the DRC are the applicant's choice, but the DRC makes no representation as to whether any changes or suggestions made during the meeting will be approved by the voting body, which is the Historic Zoning Commission. There is one item on this afternoon's agenda. Please introduce yourself and describe your item in about 3 to 5 minutes. Please focus on the specific points of your project that you want the DRC to discuss. So our first and only item is demolition, accessory and carport, and new construction accessory at 436 Boyd Mill Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're right, that's not a typo. It's just one item. It's very well-deserved. We've worked through a lot of big projects this year. I'm sure it'll pick back up next month. So the item for you today is discussion of partial demolition, which is the removal of a carport and the construction of a new garage at this property, which is 436 Boyd Mill Avenue. You can see on the screen the site plan is proposed, and I can pull up the photographs. I want to just touch on a couple of things before I turn it over to the applicant. As you're all aware, we approved a new design guidelines document effective on May 30th, and that's the guidance that's being used for this proposal. Matt has been great, the applicant, in working transitionally. He's been working on this project for a few months, and so providing guidance on a document that wasn't yet approved. I want to thank him for his patience with that. The design guidelines that apply for new accessory structure construction are a little different than what they were before. With upper stories, it is recommended by the new guidelines that the footprint be no more than 60% of the footprint of the bottom level. So that's the guidance that our applicant was under at that time, and it also limits the height, I believe, to no more than 1.5 stories. The building coverage is still the same at 35%. And there are some comments that will naturally come out of this discussion about egress. The Building and Neighborhood Services Department reviewed this and had some comments about window placement. There may be some additional windows needed or resized in order to accommodate egress requirements. But we'll talk through that as Matt goes through the project. Thank you.
Okay. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me go first.
And last.
And last. I'm used to last, I'm not used to first. The owners want to build a pool, and that's not part of the scope, but they want a pool house, a garage, and then a guest house area or a guest area over the garage for their, when their kids visit and their future grandkids visit. As you can see from the photos, well, I guess, I'm sorry, Amanda, let's go back to the site plan, please. As you can see, it's a very narrow and deep lot. It's about 90 feet wide, 545 feet deep or so. And then on to the next, you can see it's a simple colonial revival. And below that photo is to the home to the right is below right. And the home?
Actually, this is the home to the left of it as you're looking at it from the street.
Yes, and that's the home to the left on the lower left side, and the home to the right on the lower right side. And next, some photos of the house. You can see it's just a simple, nice, clean colonial revival with a 2 recent additions to the rear, and an existing carport which was built at the same time as the first addition. And as Amanda mentioned, that we're proposing removing that structure. And as you look at that carport, approximately at the halfway point would be where the proposed garage would be constructed.
So you
the-
mean halfway point
So the
in
front
depth?
face, yes, of depth. So
Okay.
the front face of the garage would be about halfway back from the front of the carport. And on the next page, you can see in the plan, when I did the rough 3D model in SketchUp, I realized, oh, those can't be egress windows. So the plan has been modified slightly. That rear-facing window of the bedroom is now an egress window. That's probably what you were referring to. And the footprint of the accessory of the garage is within the guidelines for size, and the second floor is within the guidelines of that 60% rule of the first floor.
So I'll comment briefly, if you don't mind. The accessory structure guidance for sizing of garages is that they're incidental and subordinate to the structure. What I believe Mr. Smith's referring to is the zoning ordinance limits the size of accessories to no more than 50% of the footprint of the principal structure it serves. So I believe you're saying that it's less than 50% of
Yes,
that footprint.
that's right, the zoning.
And I did that calculation, I think it's just right under that.
Mhm.
And then the upper floor is 60% or less of the bottom floor, correct?
Yes, thank you. So as you can see, the rear, behind the garage portion is what's going to be the exercise room, kind of pool room with a bathroom off of it. And I broke the massing up. If you go to the next page, front elevation. Try to keep it appropriate and scaled appropriately and detailed appropriately relative to the main structure, to the main house. And an approximation of the 3D view of what that would look like. I went out and verified, took a few spot elevations, and from where the front of the house is to where the garage is more than 4 feet of a drop. It's closer to 5 feet. And so that does help. And also with the garage being set back at about 160 feet or so from the road, about 85 feet from the front of the house, that also helps. Next. And again, these are rough models just to show the basic massing and the basic fenestration, but accurate in size. So just to orient you, the top left image is, it would be from the neighbor's yard, I suppose, near the front of their yard, perhaps, if you could see through their hedges and trees, looking towards the front and the right face. The top right image would be from the neighbors to the right, from their backyard, looking towards the rear elevation and that right side elevation. The bottom image is from the rear portion of the yard, looking up towards the structure. And you could imagine the pool being to the right, in line with that outdoor fireplace that's on the house. If that makes sense. And then the next image is just a site section elevation showing the relationship of the garage to the main house and showing the drop in grade.
Matt, would you mind explaining a little bit more what the difference in grade is and what the difference in height is if they were compared on an even plane?
Yes, as the main house is approximately 25 feet 6 inches tall, as measured from the ground. Yes. If you were to measure a line if you're standing at the house, at the front corner there, and measuring up, from that point, that'd be 25 feet 6. At the garage, it's 24 foot 6, measured from the same relative point, right there. I'm showing a 4-foot drop between that, so adding the 4 feet to the 1 foot means that the ridge would be 5 feet below the ridge of the main house. And that's a conservative number. I think it's closer to 6 feet below. Any other questions, Amanda, on the?
So does everyone understand that the grade is anticipated to be at least 4 feet difference between where the pad for the garage is going and where the average grade of the house is? And then the structure, originally, as discussed with staff, was the same height, and I asked that be lowered as well, regardless of the grade change. So it is a foot shorter plus grade change, correct?
Yes. Uh-huh. And that is all that I have to say.
Okay, so just to make sure again, the house is 25.6, and the garage is 24.6, and you got a 4-foot drop, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Questions, folks?
So, the question regarding demolition, first of all, what can you tell us about the carport as it is now?
The carport, the brick piers of the carport, they don't like because their kids have bashed in a bumper or two backing in. I guess it's about 10 years. I'm not sure how old that first edition is, if it's 10 or 15 years old, but it's less than 20 years old.
It precedes my time here, but it's clearly a modern structure. It couldn't be more than 20 years old.
Mhm.
I agree.
And it's in good shape, good repair. It's just that they want the accessory structure there.
So in terms of demolition, from my point of view, as it relates to the guidelines, that's not gonna be an issue. The one exhibit that I thought was very helpful is the one that shows the front facade of the house and what is going to be showing, yeah, that one.
Yes.
Yes, that's very good.
Yes. I did that to the best of my ability, taking the image of the picture that I took and overlaying it and getting that right. So I
Yeah.
got it as accurate as I could.
Uh-huh.
To
So you
give a
think
fair
that
representation
The
of that.
dormer, from the dormer on the accessory building will be mostly not visible?
Correct. It's going to be, and you could, if you kind of keep that image in mind and then go back to the site plan, you can see and plan the relationship of the garage to the main house.
There.
So it's a good portion of it lies behind the house. So you won't see a full front elevation until you get pretty far down the driveway.
I guess the only comment I would have about that dormer is that it does create sort of a massive look on the roof of the accessory, and I'm not sure if the rest of the commission would agree. And then one last question, the two garage doors are different sizes, correct? Those garage doors?
That could be the error
No.
of the person
Oh.
drawing it. I think actually, I kind of overdrew the shadow, so
Oh,
it
okay.
might appear that way.
Okay, so they're the same
But they're the
size.
same. They're 9 foot wide, 8 foot tall garage doors, single garage doors with the 2 feet in between them.
My question would be, I know that those properties go down, and does any part of this get into an area that's low enough that neighborhood service is going to require more foundation?
So
Let's see.
Ms. Pierce, I think what you mean is that, is there ever going to be a chance that the slab has to be taller
That's
than what
correct.
it's shown? I don't know if we have the requisite information to answer that at this time, but I do think what could be done by the Historic Zoning Commission in sensitive situations like this is that we require a foundation height survey at the time that the foundation's put in to ensure it's a certain distance lower than the house.
But if it made it taller, I feel like this is right on the edge.
Right.
So if we could know that when it came to historic zoning, that would matter to me. And then an observation that, when you are, this is not for you really, but when you're calculating the footprint of the home, are we calculating all new additions as part of that? Amanda?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I want to
Uh-huh.
make sure I consulted on your first
Yeah.
question.
When we are calculating that something cannot be, you said more than 60% in the new guidelines?
The square footage of the upper floor cannot be more than 60% of the square footage of the bottom floor
Of the accessory building,
of the garage.
just the garage.
But then the
But it-
accessory building can only be a certain percentage. of the
50%.
home.
50%.
And they- I think
Okay, but
And the
we
reason- the-
are
the reason-
counting, you're allowed to count all modern additions on a historic home.
Yes,
That this lot is forgiving,
yes.
I would think that's something we need to revisit.
Well, that is the zoning ordinance requirement. So that's certainly something where the commission, if for whatever instance, and I know it's not for this one.
Not for this
If the
one.
commission felt that a garage was,
We could still override that.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's a zoning ordinance standard I was
Gotcha.
citing.
No, this lot is ideal for this.
Yeah, well, to Ms. I think to Ms. Pierce's point, one thing that, like this particular elevation, I think, but for the lot, the massing of that from the side view looks so similar to the
I
massing
agree.
of the main home. And that, I know that house, and it looks very small from the street. So I realize there's a lot of massing in these new additions that's kind of hidden from view. So I think it's good that you have made the front of that garage more narrow and put kind of more weight on the back, because otherwise, I mean, and honestly, from the side view, I'd love to, I'm gonna drive by there, I guess, and see how much you can really see from the road, because that picture you gave is really helpful. But if you're further back, I'm just wondering how much more of that you can see, because that, to me, I know there's the back kind of porch area, but it reads very similar in size to the main home from that vantage point. And I
Chip.
think that weight,
Yeah, to me, from the side, it reads maybe 20 or 25% smaller
Yeah.
than the house.
right. And the
Yeah.
house is not a particularly wide or tall
Right.
home anyway from the front, so,
Now, this particular lot has such grace
yeah.
and forgiveness to this building, but
And I agree with both of you. That is a point that I talked about with the applicant. That's why I did ask him to provide the rendering here so that we can feel more comfortable understanding the relationship of the massing and the height to one another, especially from the street view.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in fairness, I think a lot of what is hiding it is landscaping, which we're not supposed to consider.
Absolutely.
So, but,
when that comes back, it might be good if that were kind of taken out.
yeah,
the
Oh, if
tree.
the landscaping were
Yeah.
taken out? Okay.
just so we can see how it, because
How
we're
it
not supposed to
reads.
consider that, but,
So that's true. Looking at this image, you would see from this angle, most of that garage. As you can see, it's a tree or a large bush, I guess it's a tree, there at the back corner of the house, which currently is obscuring that.
I'd love to touch on a comment that Ms. Marquardt made while we're having this discussion. She had mentioned the dormer, and I did advise the applicant that it may be better to do one shed dormer instead of two gable dormers, which was another option that he considered. But I'd love to hear the commission's comments on that. My worry as staff was that doing two gable dormers might make it feel too much like the historic structure.
in my opinion, it looked like too mini-me, and.
Yeah,
I agree.
and
And-
maybe not that many of a mini-me.
Mini.
I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I'm afraid it would draw out that it's,
And it's almost more, what am I trying to say? Formal looking, what you've done with the shed dormer to me looks like a more secondary structure in this situation.
Yeah, so we're leaving the gabled dormers as, okay, that's the front part of the main house, and that's unique. And also, if you look at the pictures of the house, that addition has a shed dormer. So when you're standing in the driveway, you would see 2 shed dormers, so it would provide kind of a design continuity to the rear portion of the house. And that is, if you go to the, I'm not sure which, I think it's before that, if you keep on going back. Back more, there we go. That lower left is standing from where the garage would be, looking towards the house.
Matt, do you mind elaborating on the materials proposed for the project?
Sure. The siding to match that, the siding of the addition, so that'd be white cement fiber, 5-inch, I'm assuming 5-inch exposure. I believe that addition is 5-inch. And then the base could either be a stucco coat over the CMU foundation wall, or it could be a brick veneer. Do y'all have a preference?
I do. Brick.
The brick?
I'd like to talk a little bit about fenestration pattern, if I may. There are some locations that BNS mentioned might need to change to allow for egress. I believe this is a smaller window at my suggestion because I wanted to mitigate the size and it feel more like a 1.5 story instead of a 2-story. Is this one based on the floor plan, Matt, that might need to be?
That's a bathroom. So when you're looking at the second floor plan, on the right end is the bathroom, so that's up there.
So that will be fine, being smaller. Okay, and then this will need to be an adjusted dormer to allow for an egress window.
If you go back to the plan, I actually changed the plan so that I wouldn't have to do any window wells or anything like that there. And if you zoom in on that bedroom, and this wouldn't affect the exterior any, but on the interior, where the part that's labeled attic, that window that's there, that's going to be reconfigured, so that window will actually be part of the bedroom. And so that will function as the egress window.
Which window are you talking about?
The rear-facing window, that's
The
right
se-
above the
Okay,
word
that's, all right,
attic.
that's going to be part of the bedroom.
Correct.
All right, okay,
And that faces towards the rear of the property.
okay, right, got it.
And that's because those other windows, the sill height is too tall and the windows are too small because its relationship to the roof.
so will
Okay.
the attic just go away?
There'll still be a small attic space each side of that window.
Mhm.
So it'll be like a recess in the window. Just have to be really careful to keep that square footage down, so it's below the
So
60%.
so the attic space is not counted in the square footage?
Yeah,
Correct, just the
Okay.
heated living space.
So what is the square footage if you include the attic? Do you bump over the 60%?
It would go over the 60% if I included the attic space. Of course, with a 1.5 structure like this, you have, a lot of the attic space is really low
Right.
and not really usable.
Do you have an approximate square footage of what the attic space would be, just to kind of address Mr. Denton's question?
Let's see, just a rough idea, that would be 4 times 16, 20. Maybe 250 square feet or something like that?
Not of attic space, you mean?
Of leftover space, that's like not used, that would be attic. If you go back to the second floor plan, the gray areas are the areas that are,
I think she's talking about the part that's labeled attic that has a
Yeah.
door into it with the window. What's the square footage of that
Oh,
attic
just of
space?
that.
Yeah.
That couldn't be more than 20 or so
it would
square
be
feet.
like, it would be like 30 square feet or something like that. And basically, the space that's gonna be to the left is actually gonna be the strip closet. I'm rotating the closet up. And the space to the right is there's gonna be an access door, and I'm thinking that they could like throw their suitcases in there or something like that.
So the reason the 60% guideline was approved by everyone was because it would limit the height of accessory structures fundamentally. And that's where Matt's struggling a little bit to try to get the height and space in there. So he's got it right at 60% of the inhabitable space. Correct?
Mhm. Yeah.
So we'll be over 60 when those attic changes get made. Is that right, Matt?
No, I'm keeping it at 60.
Okay.
And he's
But-
just reconfiguring the attic space so that it's two different spaces instead of one connected space, so that he can have the bedroom attached to this window.
But you're telling us the city's interpretation is that the 60% does not include unheated and cool space?
Well, we don't provide that specificity in the design guidelines. It just says no more than 60% of. So that could be something that the commission considers.
Yeah. One thing that's concerning to me about that is you could have made that attic room, you know, a 10 by 20 room that's not heated or cooled.
Right, and
you
that's
know,
not the intent of the guideline,
Right, right.
exactly.
And of course, we're looking at is it subservient to the main structure as opposed to the 60% hard and fast?
Absolutely. So in cases like the hypothetical that's on the far end of appropriateness that you mentioned, that would be one where I would find that, you know, the staff would recommend against it. With this one being very close, it's a call that I think we talk through. It's our first case that we've had since that guideline's been established. And so this could set a precedent for how we'd like to handle those moving forward.
Well, I would argue this doesn't set a precedent, because this is a situation where the lot drops, where it's a long skinny lot.
Oh,
And
yes, ma'am. I just
every-
mean the
yeah.
interpretation of attic space.
Okay. And
I
every-
absolutely understand. This
Yeah,
is a
everything is
unique lot size.
right, it's working in our favor. The only concern I have is if it goes to neighborhood services and needs to be a foot taller, then I would not be comfortable with approving this.
Well, there can be conditions on the approval that I can certainly write as
Yeah.
recommendation. And you have your building official here hearing this, that we limit the grade specifically by its relationship to the grade of the house at a point certain.
But
So
thi-
it's measurable.
To me, this is a good project.
Right.
And-
That's
and-
not unlike situations we've had with infill in the past where there's been some concern about the appropriateness and it's kind of right on that line of being appropriate versus not being appropriate. We've done foundation height surveys at Ledgelawn, for example, pretty often, right? So that's definitely something we can consider here if that's a concern.
And is your concern that potential height of the exposed foundation wall.
My
It-
concern is that you go to neighborhood services and they go, oh, because of blah, blah, because I know it's probably near floodplain. It's got to be taller, and then that makes the whole building
Oh,
taller.
relative to the floodplain.
Mhm. And then I would want it to be, well, we're going to negotiate the overall height to accommodate the taller foundation.
And I don't think this is in the floodplain.
Good.
When I did my zoning research, that, it wasn't in the map.
It's not. I don't
It's
think
not.
it is either, but I just,
And
Wanna be
relative to
sure.
the grade drop, the rear mass, you could have, you could take the siding and bring it down lower so that the top edge of your foundation wall would drop down at that point.
right.
So you wouldn't see too much of it exposed.
And my mind is on it because I'm going, how did we approve the post on the carport with the tall brick?
I don't know, I wasn't here for that
It
one.
looks like booties.
So
So
I
I'm kind
can,
of glad it's going.
I can speak to the height a little bit more certainty, or provide a little bit more certainty, that Building and Neighborhood Services would not provide a building permit for a height that is the same as the house. I had
Okay.
asked Mr. Smith to lower it so it was shorter than a house regardless of grade change.
Yeah.
So on an even grade, the garage is shorter than the house, and that is a requirement of our
Okay.
team.
And just like the 60% is really, unless I've got it wrong, that's really an interpretation from the zoning ordinances.
It's an
And-
interpretation of the design guidelines. The 60% is not in the zoning ordinance.
Okay, gotcha, thanks.
But if there were another situation, the lot went up or something, we do not have to approve 60%.
Correct.
Yes.
The guideline is that it be no more than
Got
60%.
it.
The
Got it.
commission likewise could approve more than 60% if it found it appropriate in
Right.
that location.
Okay.
Anything else?
I have a comment. Can we go back to the, I guess, the front elevation of the garage? So I know that we're seeing a good bit of this treatment over the garage doors, but I feel like that as simple as the house is, that might be a detail that maybe should be removed, because I think it's going to be competing with the house.
That was something I did want to bring up, and I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. The Historic Zoning Commission in past has denied approvals for awnings, especially continuous awnings over multiple garage doors in the past. Some ways that the commission has addressed that, depending on the need, there may be an odd space where that feel like, for lack of a better way of saying this, a belt is needed to kind of break up the dead space between the window sills and the top of the garage door. The commission's approved arbors where they're flat. The commission has approved 2 different awnings, one over each garage door in lieu of one expansive one, which does break up the heaviness. So there are options for that. Staff would advocate for the 2 awnings as opposed to the 1. I think that would address Ms. Besser's issue, perhaps. Do you think so?
I think it would be better. It just seems heavy. And I think that, again, when we get the perspective that shows us the garage without the landscaping, we're going to see that the garage is fairly visible if something should happen to that landscaping.
So are you thinking 2 awnings there rather than 1?
I think that's an improvement. Honestly, I
okay.
would prefer to see none, because I think, again, the house is so simple that, the garage is going to be competing with it in terms of the design details.
Staff would advocate for no awning over garage doors. It's not historically typical, but because the commission's found in the past that it could be needed in certain situations, depending on the principal structure it serves, they've approved breaking it up. So it would be recommended to remove it. Perhaps Mr. Smith could provide some options showing different ways of addressing it.
Thank you.
Tyler, do you have a comment? You
Yes.
were looking like you did.
I just wait till the end. I agree with Susan about the awnings, just a little kind of, even if there is an awning, that elevation, it's a little kind of heavy-handed. It's got a big porch rack and a cornice and big brackets, and it's like, it just holds a lot of weight because there's a lot of pieces, and all the pieces are kind of chunky. So I'm not saying that necessarily I'm totally against anything. I think it would be good to see some options when it comes back, and one of those options ought to be nothing. The one thing on the side profile, the site section, I think it helps me scale-wise when I think that's a leftover kind of gable on top of the garage roof. That's not really there anymore. I think you said you're gonna do shed dormer.
Correct.
And so, I mean, that does take the scale down a little bit.
With that style of dormer, and it was too heavy.
And then one of the questions, and this is not necessarily specific to this project, but are the stairs counted in the second floor calculations in terms of square footage when we're going to the 60% number?
The guidelines really just says that the square footage should be limited to no more than 60%
Okay.
of the bottom floor, so it doesn't specify.
In Metro, they don't make you count it because you have to count it on the first floor. It's like double dipping, but I wasn't sure how y'all all saw that, because we're gonna see more of these, and that's a lot of square footage is the stair hole, and, might be something we think about.
That's a great point. Matt, do you happen to know if you counted the location of the stairs on the upper floor as part of it?
No, I didn't count it. Whenever I do, square footage calculations.
Yeah.
When I design it. It's typical, it's to, not count the stairs twice, you count it on the first floor,
That's right.
not on the second.
Thank you.
That's what I see most of in other places, but I just asking. It has bearing on, somebody really getting 500 square feet and we're telling them they're getting 6, or vice versa. Just making sure we're clear. Yeah, that's all my comments.
Anything else? Amanda, do you have anything else?
Just looking at it from this angle, I did want to elaborate on Tyler's point. This shape is not the same shape that you saw on the front elevation.
Right.
So Matt, do you mind explaining that a little bit? This
The-
looks more massive than the intent, and I want it to be more clear.
I think the only difference is that front dormer. And I had drawn, when I drew this, and I should have gone back and changed it to the shed dormer. I apologize for that. But I drew it as just a gable dormer. And when I studied the front, I didn't like it. It was too massive looking. So I changed it to the shed dormer. I tried a smaller gable dormer, and I felt it looked too much like the dormers on the front of the house. Other than that, let me refer to the image, the SketchUp image. The slope is, I think is now a 10-12 instead of a 12-12 slope. So when you look at that section elevation, that site section elevation, the slope is showing it as 12-12, and it's now 10-12. So those are the two differences.
Those will be good to see updated when it comes back. I think it'll help the case.
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask about, and I don't know if this is getting too much into the weeds, but the relationship of the cross gable is a little different on the accessory than it is on the house. Like the cross gable sits lower than the peak a certain amount, but it's higher on the garage, and I think that's one thing that's been concerning me about the massing. I don't know if you can drop this ridge any more than you have. I do think that would be something the commission
I
would
can
feel
think
more
of-
comfortable with, given some of the comments we've seen today, or heard today.
I can certainly take a look at that.
Do you all see what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm super concerned about it, because I don't know that anybody will have that vantage point, but, you know, even keeping your main gable that we're seeing here at 1212 and dropping the other to 10 would give you the same relief in that drawing, but
Mhm.
it just makes, structurally speaking, you gotta do some weird rafter cuts, and some odd things are gonna start happening in the ceilings, especially if your ceilings are vaulted. Start getting funny angles on different sides of the building.
Mhm. I think I was just trying to explore some options, because it sounds to me like some of the comments are that it feels like the upper floor is a little heavy, and a way to try to mitigate that without actually lessening any square footage.
At one point, I had a shed dormer along the back portion of the roof. So when you're looking at this image, if you see that triple window on the first floor, above that, I had, in the roof area, I had a shed dormer with no windows, but that was just basically to give the sufficient height to the space inside. And what I decided, I wanted to simplify the form and not have that, and I brought the height of the roof up just a little bit in order to compensate. Would you prefer a shed dormer and a lower roof?
Not a dormer with no windows in it.
And a dormer with windows would not be preferred either, because that does look directly into a neighboring property. So I think your inclination was the right one.
Okay. Well, like I said, I can look at that and make sure that that's kind of at the minimum.
Mhm. What is that head height proposed to be?
What is the head height? They're very tall people, especially the husband. So they were really concerned about the height. You know, I'm used to 6-foot walls in these second-story spaces, and they wanted it to be as close to 8 feet as possible.
Normally, I would not feel comfortable with an accessory only being a foot shorter than the house with the massing that this has. So I do think that anything that you can do to lower that, short of pushing it further away from the house, which I think the owners are not keen on doing, that would be helpful.
I think I'd be most comfortable at this point taking it to CAD, taking it to Revit, so I can get real precise with it.
The only other thing I'll say, just to make sure, is when I looked at the overhead view, it does look really close to that property line, so I'm sure you've confirmed it meets the setback, but that's not really an issue for us.
Yes,
It's probably just deceptive, but it looks like it's right on.
I think that black line, I think, is the setback line.
Oh,
actually.
okay,
So
cool,
that's kind of a
good.
deceptive
Yeah.
site plan. It kind of threw me too, since
I see the other line
the
now.
property line is so faint.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Just one last, I think Mr. Denton brought up a good point about how we're kind of launching into the new guidelines, and that the 60% of the bottom floor does not include the attic,
Yeah.
technically.
I'm just-
However, we, as a commission, according to what Amanda said, could potentially interpret it to include the attic. Is that correct?
We may need to spend more time talking through that particular guideline. I think the intent was to ensure that it was a true half story above the bottom floor and not the perception of a full second floor above. We're trying to, by virtue of the guidelines, recommend that accessory structures be no larger than a 1.5 story scale. Now, a half story can mean something different to a lot of people. And when you're talking to a contractor versus a historic preservationist, for example, we work in the field of perception, what you view from the street, and it is sometimes difficult to come up with language that meets the needs of both in a way that's understandable. But the intent was to try to make it feel like a true half story and not a full story. I think what you're seeing here is the upper floor, as Matt had mentioned, is they're 8-foot walls instead of 6-foot knee walls, which we sometimes see on half stories. So it does feel a little taller.
And the, which one was I gonna say? Just had a blank. That back bedroom, can you go to the plan of the bedroom? The challenge was to, because of the depth of the garage, I would be over the 60% if that attic space were incorporated into the living space. But in either event, it's not affecting the overall height either way of the gable or the street presence, if you follow me.
But I guess my reaction
Does that
is
make
if you had,
sense?
if you had to lose that space, if it were counted in the 60%, you would necessarily have to shrink it in otherwise to get you back. So you might you'd have a smaller massing up above because the rooms would necessarily be smaller. I just think we have to be careful about rooms that are not finished and are.
I think
listed
that's
as an
exactly
attic.
right. You're exactly
Because-
right, Josh. And here's the
Yeah.
problem.
That's a
You
great
got,
point.
if you'll scroll down, Amanda, to where it talks about the square footage on the bottom, and those numbers figure out to be 60%. Now, what I'm hearing is, in the second floor, that really doesn't include the attic.
It doesn't include the
So,
attic.
so
Or
if
the
that doesn't, right. But that's confusing to us, to me, anyway. And if you're trying to stay with the 60%,
Because that's
that
where I
your
was going back to-
calculations come out to 60%, but that doesn't include the attic.
Right, and that's where I was saying earlier, like if that room was 20 by 20 and just wasn't heated and cooled, and then all of a sudden, later
It
gets
became
finished,
heated and
yeah,
cooled.
Yeah.
I
it became-
certainly
right.
understand it, and we'll talk internally. I mean, Randy is a contractor and a building official. He can see it from the points of view that I may not necessarily be able to see it. We can collaborate and try to come up with something that will help address that. But please keep in mind, that's one guideline out of a handful of guidelines that address form and scale.
I understand that.
Yeah, so if you're worried that one thing might cause somebody to, not yours, by the way, this isn't relevant, this is more of a hypothetical thing, might cause a form that's larger than you intend, there are other guidelines to help mitigate that.
Right, I mean, we could find it only appropriate to have the
Mm-hmm.
second story be 40%
Right.
of the first floor because of the sizing and the massing and all those things in the context.
Yeah,
But
the way it's read is just not to exceed
Right.
60%.
I just-
Absolutely.
but that should be more of, and I know we can, because their guidelines exceed that if in the right circumstance,
Mm-hmm. But you bring up an excellent point. This is their first time
Right.
working through this in real world, so.
and that's a small attic. I mean, it's not a 20 by 20
No,
attic.
that-
Exactly.
But you
It,
could-
it doesn't really impact this project.
Right.
No.
But it can.
Yes.
And,
I didn't want Matt to sit here feeling worried about the
no,
discussion.
You're a test case, Matt.
Well,
Oh, I'm honored.
while we're looking at this, would you go back to the site plan?
Yes.
Because
It's good to be the only one in it, Matt.
the only one, oh, it's great,
He's loving
great,
it.
Matt.
Every minute.
Do you all, the picture that was drawn of what we're gonna see, and then when you look at that, is there any way to slide the garage a bit more behind the house? Or if you think that it's just this site plan that's making me think more of it's exposed than I thought. You're welcome to state that.
It could possibly.
Could it come over
Go-
6 feet? Let's just
not
put out a number.
6 feet. I was thinking more, it could go over, certainly could go over 6 inches. It could go over a foot or two, but then it might
Behind
start
the house.
crowding that area where the pool.
Yeah,
I
could
think
it
she's
go-
saying pushing it back further away
No,
from.
no. I'm saying.
She's saying
could it
pushing inward.
inward a couple of feet was what I was thinking.
Got
Yeah, and, Yeah, I can definitely take a look at that and see,
Okay.
see if I can do that, if I can do that without compromising that space and
Yeah.
stuff.
I think that will help
I
with
can do
the
that.
perception from the road.
Anything else? Amanda, anything?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Okay,
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
appreciate it.
Yep. Right.
Gosh, I can't believe this.
So moved.
Um,
I can't believe it.
We're done.
So
Move-
moved.
So moved to adjourn. Moved, done, finished.
Thank you all.